Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Elm-Beacon Connector Quick-Build project meeting this evening. We're going to give folks just a minute to come into the meeting, and then we'll get started on the presentation. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all again for joining us for the Elm-Beacon Connector Quick-Build project. Before we start, we'd love to acknowledge the presence of some of the counselors that are joining us this evening, Counselor Ewan Campen, Counselor Scott, and Counselor Wilson. We also want to share that Counselor Said and Davis were unable to attend due to another public evening this evening, but they send their regards and are working closely with us on this project. Before we get started, Counselor Ewan Campen, would you like to share some welcome remarks?
Sure. Thank you very much, Kate, and welcome to everybody. I am incredibly excited to help launch this project tonight. This is the first quick build project that is being launched by the Mobility Department since the City Council passed our Safe Streets Ordinance, and I'm sure you'll hear more about that. But that was something that took many, many years of work from tons of community members, from staff, from city councilors in particular. My colleague, Councilor Burnley, really took the lead on the drafting of that legislation. And I am really, really thrilled that that is helping us move forward on these goals around safe streets. So thank you all for being here. This is just the very beginning of what is sure to be a lot of public outreach. And really thrilled that you're all here. And I'm excited to listen to all the questions and comments we have tonight.
Thank you, Counselor. So folks, thank you again for coming. We're going to get started with a few virtual meeting logistics instructions. And you're going to take us to the next slide. So we are recording the meeting this evening. We will post a recording of tonight's meeting on the project webpage, which you can find at somervillema.gov/elmbeacon. As you can see, you'll find your cameras off for the duration of this meeting, and we will enable your microphone only when you are speaking during the discussion portion. Throughout the meeting, we'll conduct a few optional poll questions within the Zoom platform, but again, these are totally optional, just here to help connect with folks throughout the meeting. And after the full presentation, we'll open the meeting to discussion. We're going to first answer questions that come in through the chat. So if you write any questions to us in the chat, we're going to try to read through those and share them out loud with answers in that time. We'll do that for about 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll move to spoken comments. So if you have any technical difficulties throughout the meeting, please don't hesitate to email transportation@somervillema.gov, or you can also feel free to call 617-366-7293. Again, for technical difficulties, but for your chat questions, please send them through the chat box. So we'd love to share a little bit about our community meeting purpose, outcomes, and process. We aim to create a safer design for Elm Street between Russell Street and Somerville Avenue, Somerville Avenue between the City Line and Elm Street, Beacon Street between Somerville Avenue and Oxford Street, and Mawson Street as part of the Somerville Bicycle Network Plan and Safe Streets Ordinance. So in this meeting, we'll introduce the project, you'll learn about our project goals, some background, potential design options, and ways to engage during the design development. We want to hear your transportation safety concerns for the project area and your initial feedback to help us start designing this quick build protected bike lanes project. And during this meeting, we will present a slideshow on the project and then have a question and answer session for community input. Over the next month, there will also be many more opportunities to get involved in the project, and we'll talk about those different ways later in the presentation. So before we launch into the presentation, we'd love to start with one of those optional poll questions. We've got an introduction one for you. I'm going to launch the pop-up and you'll launch the questions and you'll see a pop-up on your screen. But just for folks to hear, the questions are, where in Somerville do you live? What are the main ways that you generally travel? And please share some of the ways that you use the street. We've got some options for you. These are totally optional. But just helps us and everyone who's joining this evening see a little bit about who is joining. Just for folks to know, we have about 120 attendees. And so in just a moment, I'll end the poll once we have some answers come in, and then I'll share back some of those results. Thanks, folks. We have maybe about a quarter of folks who have answered. I'll give maybe about a minute more for folks or more folks to participate. And thank you again for those who are participating in the poll. Wonderful, maybe about 30 seconds more. And again, if you have any trouble with the window, you can send it through the chat too. Okay, seeing that I've got about a majority of folks who participated, I'm gonna give about 10 more seconds and then share out the results. Wonderful. Okay, for those of you who can see on your screen, I'm going to share back some of the answers. Thank you all. We had about 108 folks participate in the poll. So for that first question about where in Somerville do you live, we had about 13% said they live on Elm Street, about 4 on Somerville Ave, 6% on Mossland Street, and then we've got 39% people who live within a 5-minute walk of the project area, and then about 30% who live in Somerville but further than a 5-minute walk. And so some of the main ways that folks travel, and again, you could choose as many as you apply. So if you both walk or bus or bike, you could select all of those. We've got about 78% of people say they bike, 46 say they take the bus, 49% drive a vehicle, 13% use a commuter rail, 56% use rapid transit. Rapid transit's like your green lines or your MBTA subway lines. 8% use rideshare, and about 80% walk or roll. And roll is a term we love to use because it's inclusive of using a mobility device, something like a wheelchair. So lastly, how are some of the ways that we use the streets in the project area today? About a quarter of folks live on a street in the project area. 57% use one or more of these streets when they travel to work. 15% use one or more of these streets to travel to the Kennedy School. 75% use one of these streets to travel to Porter Square. 37% take the bus on one or more of these streets. 5% work on one of these streets. And then 41% use one or more of these streets as a primary way to get to and from their home. And about 60% use to go to a business or businesses. So thank you so much for participating in our poll. We are now really excited to get into the presentation. I'm going to hand it off to my team member, Lillian, to get us started. Oh, my apologies. I'm actually going to jump into the agenda. So now that we've wrapped up the welcome, we're going to dive into the presentation shortly. We'll start with sharing a bit about who we are and what we do. We will then describe why we're embarking on this work for these 4 specific streets. We'll describe more about the project plan and wrap up the presentation with describing what's next and how community members can engage in the project. And then following that, we'll open up for discussion. We've got some time estimates on the agenda for you here just to give you a good idea of what to expect throughout the presentation. So I'll now hand it off to Lillian to begin our presentation.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you everyone for coming. I will introduce our project team and also share some of the values and plans that guide our work. So this project is being led by the Mobility Division, which is a part of the city's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development, known as OSPCD. My name is Lillian Worth, and I'm a transportation planner, and I'm working with Adam Polinsky, senior planner, and Kate White, transportation planner for outreach and engagement. And although mobility is at the helm of this project, we always work closely with other city departments, including parking, engineering, and the fire department when we're proposing changes to a streetscape. For this particular project, because it's on the city line, we're also coordinating with our counterparts at the City of Cambridge. So I want to briefly share a bit of background on the values that shape our work. For all projects, we start first and foremost with the goal of keeping people safe on our streets. We also aim to increase access to public transit and to create more sustainable options for people to get around the city. We have 2 ordinances that really underscore those commitments. The Complete Streets Ordinance from 2014 is somewhat broad, and it really stipulates that when we're redesigning streets, we should be designing them for all modes of travel and also all ages and abilities. The Safe Streets Ordinance, which was passed earlier this year, sets more specific targets and timelines for some of these street safety projects, including implementing protected bike lanes from the Bike Network Plan, improving accessible parking spaces, and also making pedestrian and transit improvements. In addition to the ordinances, we also have a number of long-range plans that contribute to our vision for this project. So the overarching plan, Somerville's comprehensive plan, is Summer Vision 2040, which sets the city's broad values for community-oriented planning. Climate Forward Plan ensures that our projects also support the city's mission to protect our environment. The Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan helps us make our streets more accessible to everyone. And I want to note that although this plan is quite old, it is currently being updated. So we will have a new version soon. And this is very important to some of our mobility projects. And finally, the Bike Network Plan enables safe infrastructure for people biking. One of the other commitments you may have heard about is Vision Zero, which is a commitment to eliminate deaths and serious injuries on our streets. And we have a Vision Zero action plan to help us get to this goal. In essence, we know it's not realistic to prevent 100% of people from ever making a mistake. So our philosophy is that we need to design streets to account for those mistakes to ensure that they don't result in fatalities or life-altering injuries. The graphic here illustrates some of that thinking. It shows how reductions in vehicle speeds have a huge effect on how likely somebody is to survive a pedestrian crash. So next, I'll go into some of the factors that went into our decision about why we're making safety improvements here specifically. All of the streets in our project area are part of the Bike Network Plan, with Elm-Beacon and Somerville Ave planned to receive protected bike lanes and Mossland Street set to become a low-traffic neighborway. And we'll get a little more into the details of what a neighborway means later in the presentation. Elm-Beacon and Somerville Ave are also part of what we call our priority network. So these are the most important connecting streets that really form the background of our bike network. And the map shown here on this slide shows where our project fits into that priority network. The Safe Streets Ordinance passed by the City Council obligates us to create approximately 30 miles of new protected bike lanes by 2030, which is about 4.5 miles per year counting from today. And this project, when it's complete, will provide almost 2 miles of those new protected bike lanes. So it's a very high impact project in a really key area of our network. I also want to talk about the high crash network map. So our project area has been identified as a particularly dangerous area for people walking, rolling, and biking. This map shows both streets and intersections across the city that have a high number of bike and pedestrian crashes. You'll notice that Beacon, Elm, and Somerville Ave are all considered high crash streets. And our project area also includes 3 intersections that are high crash intersections. Another important part of this project is, well, why is it called the Elm-Beacon Connector? We're calling it that because it really does sit between several really important parts of the city that we want to help people access safely. The first map on this slide illustrates the existing bike infrastructure to the north, south, and east of the project area with very obvious gap in the middle that we aim to close. And this project will also help us connect to existing protected bike lanes that the city of Cambridge has completed on their part of Somerville Ave in Porter Square. On the right, we're showing all of the transit connections with Porter Square Red Line station in the heart of the neighborhood, as well as several bus lines in the project area. So even though a big part of this project is about bike lanes, this is also a complex space with a lot of different road users, and we aim to make improvements for each mode of travel. So finally, it's important to acknowledge that this neighborhood, it's a neighborhood, but it also has a mix of, commercial buildings. We've got people living here. We've got people going to the Kennedy School. These photos are just a few kind of tidbits of some of the important places people are traveling to and from. We want to also acknowledge that this is the gateway to the Beacon Street protected bike lane, which is a very high use corridor and one of the best quality bike facilities in the city. And currently it dumps you out on the northern end in a very wide unprotected intersection. So we want to fix that. And we want to acknowledge that all of the different elements in this neighborhood are important. And we want to make sure that as we develop design plans, we're considering everybody in the area who lives here and who works here, who visits and who travels through here. So with that context in mind, I'll turn that over to my colleague Adam, who will describe the project plan.
Thanks, Lillian. And thanks again to everyone who joined tonight to learn more about this project. I'm going to talk to you all about what the plan for the project is at this time, what we do know, what we don't know yet, and how we're going to go about making the decisions that will ultimately result in a concept design that we're going to come back to you all with in a few months. So at this time, the streets within the project area do not currently meet most of the goals defined in the previous slides by Lillian. They prioritize cars at the expense of people walking, biking, and rolling as seen in the photo to the right. To better reflect the values of our community, we will be redesigning these streets and implementing changes using quick build materials like paint, signs, and flex posts. The new designs will include protected bike lanes on Elm Street between Russell Ave and Somerville Ave, Somerville Ave between Acadia Park and Elm Street, which is about where the city line is at Acadia Park, and then Beacon Street between Somerville Ave and Oxford Street. They will also include making Mossland Street a low volume, low speed neighborway, adding clear corners markings to restrict parking within 20 feet of all crosswalks and intersections within the project area, and making changes at some traffic signals. We're also looking to make improvements to crosswalks and potentially changing bus stop locations. And that's something that we really want to get feedback from you all on to help shape where we focus those efforts, specifically for some of the pedestrian and bus treatments. Since this is a quick build project, we wanted to make sure it was clear regarding what is and isn't within the scope of the project, since it's a little bit more limited than other types of projects the city does. As far as what is included, we will definitely be installing protected bike lanes. We will be changing parking regulations, narrowing travel lanes, modifying traffic signals, and changing the street network. And that's specifically in reference to Mossland Street. As mentioned on the last slide, we're also looking at opportunities to improve crosswalks or make changes to bus stops. And we may be able to coordinate with our urban forestry team as well to plant some additional trees on these streets. And that's another thing that I think we want to hear from folks on in terms of like, are there big gaps in the current urban canopy? What won't be included as part of this project is any street repaving or sidewalk reconstruction. There's not really going to be any like physical changes to the street. So we won't be able to add any physical traffic calming treatments like speed humps or raised crosswalks. That will also preclude us from adding any new crosswalks at this time, because you do have to build at a minimum curb ramps to add a new crosswalk. There won't be any utility work of any kind either, whether that's below or above ground. And we also won't be adding any planters as part of this project. So that obviously begs the question, if the scope is so limited, why are we doing a quick build project and not full reconstruction? Well, the main answer to that is that at this time, none of the streets within the project area are in the capital investment plan or the 5-year repaving plan. Now, I know the map on the right is a little bit too small to read at this time, but if you'd like to better understand the process of selecting streets for the 5-year plan and finding out which streets those are, you can follow the link on the slide here to check that out in more detail. But suffice it to say that Elm, Somerville, Mossland, and that section of Beacon are not on that plan at this time. So we are still obligated to deliver 30 miles of protected bike lane over the next 5 years, even if not all of those can be full reconstruction projects. So for this particular project, that leaves a quick build lines and signs method as the only way to deliver street improvements here for the foreseeable future. That may sound like there are a lot of things that aren't possible, but there are some benefits to a quick build as well. This type of project allows us to implement things on a much faster timeline. The construction is a lot less impactful because most of it happens overnight, and it allows us to be more flexible, whether that's during implementation or afterwards. If there are things that need to be tweaked, it's a lot easier to do it with paint and signs and cones than it is with curbs and concrete. I also want to take a minute to make sure everyone knew exactly what protected bike lanes were and why they're going to be a part of this project. So protected bike lanes are dedicated space for people on bikes that are physically separated from motor vehicle traffic with curbs or vertical objects such as flex posts. Somerville has built 8 miles of protected bike lanes since 2017, and we plan to increase the number of those facilities going forward, including as part of this project. Protected bike lanes are important elements of safe streets because they do a few different things. They increase comfort and access for people of all ages and abilities. They reduce crash and injury risk for everyone. They eliminate the threat of dooring, which is really scary if you're riding a bike and you're right next to a parked car. Someone opens that door without looking. You could get hurt pretty bad. So it eliminates that threat entirely. And then reduces potential conflicts between vehicles and people biking, as well as encouraging slower traffic speeds by visually narrowing the roadway, which, going back to our Vision Zero slide, is really important to keep everyone on our streets safe. So with that, I'd like to start to go into some of the design options that we're currently considering. Let's start by looking at Elm Street, which is the longest section of street in the project. While the width of Elm does vary quite a bit between Russell and Somerville Ave, as you all may well know, most of it looks roughly like what we're showing here, which has one travel lane in each direction, one sort of southbound, one northbound or eastbound, westbound, depending on how you want to look at it. And there's also a lane of parking on each side. Our design for Elm Street will include a travel lane in each direction, so we're not planning on one-waying Elm Street. And it will also, at a minimum, include protected bike lanes in each direction per the bike network plan. For the majority of the street, and like I said, with the slight caveat that the width does change a little bit, so this isn't going to be exactly how it all looks, that will leave typically about 7 feet of space. At this time, we anticipate using that 7 feet of space to provide a lane of on-street parking, and we welcome the community's input on which side of the street parking will remain, whether that's on individual blocks or on slightly longer stretches. But that's definitely something that we want to work with everyone to understand where it would be most beneficial to keep that parking, which side of the street. And while the diagram I showed can be helpful to start to get an idea of what that could look like, I also thought it would be a good idea to give a real world example of the potential future condition on Elm. So this is a photo of Holland Street where we installed protected bike lanes in 2022, and it has a very similar width to Elm Street for the majority of the corridor. And could be a really good example of sort of that future condition. You can see that flex posts separate the bike lanes in both directions, and then one side of the street also has parking next to the bike lane. So the only caveat I'll add is that we won't be doing any repaving as part of this project, or any reconstruction, but otherwise there are just a lot of similarities to what Elm could potentially look like in the future. Now let's move over to Somerville Ave. In the example shown here, we are on Somerville Ave at Mossland Street, facing west towards Porter Square, kind of that large expanse with the railroad tracks on your left, if you're facing that direction. So currently this stretch includes 2 travel lanes in each direction, something we don't have a ton of in Somerville, and 2 unprotected bike lanes. So there's no physical separation between those bike lanes and motor vehicles. Keep in mind that this street does look a little bit different on each block of Somerville Ave that's within the project area. It changes, width's the same, but whether there's turn lanes or parking, etc., is a little bit different on each block. And we're just picking this one segment to give you an idea of how we expect the street to change. So for the full length of this segment between the city line and Elm Street, our design will include a travel lane in each direction and a protected bike lane in each direction. That part is similar to Elm Street. In the stretch between Mossland Street and Beacon Street, the example we're showing here, that leaves roughly 16 feet of space. So at this time, we anticipate using that space to provide a turn lane right turning vehicles onto Beacon Street from Somerville Ave eastbound, as well as slightly wider buffers between the bike lanes and the vehicle lanes to provide a more comfortable facility. However, I will add a caveat that we'll be conducting a traffic analysis to determine the best way to move people safely and efficiently through these intersections. Next, we'll move over to Beacon Street. So there isn't a big chunk of Beacon, but it is a critical piece. As Lillian had mentioned earlier in the presentation, there is a gap here where the current protected facilities further down don't lead up to the ones on Somerville Ave. So in the example shown here, we're at Beacon on Oxford. We're on Beacon at Oxford, facing north towards Somerville Ave. Currently, the short stretch here includes a southbound travel lane, 2 northbound travel lanes, a southbound unprotected bike lane, and a parking lane on the west side. And then we will be designing Beacon Street to include, at a minimum, a travel lane in each direction and a protected bike lane in each direction. in this stretch between Roseland and Oxford that leaves about 10 feet of space, and we currently anticipate using that space to provide a lane of parking on the west side of the street and slightly wider buffers between the bike lanes and the vehicle lanes. However, we are also considering an option that includes a right turn lane instead of a parking lane. Depending on which way we go, we'll be coming back to you all at the concept design phase to talk through some of the trade-offs of that particular option, depending on where we land and why we got there. Building these new protected bike lanes on a short stretch of Beacon Street will connect the new facilities that we're building on Somerville Ave and Elm Street to those dedicated bike lanes on the rest of Beacon, so it is filling that critical gap. Next, we'll move on to Mossland Street, which is a little bit different than the others. And that's really because Mossland has just a very different characteristics than some of the other streets. It's really short. It's much narrower than Elm or Somerville Ave or Beacon, and it's fully residential. So for that reason, when we developed our bike network plan, it was designated as a neighborway. So for those that don't know, a neighborway is a street that is characterized primarily by low traffic volumes. There are not a lot of cars that use neighborways. And those cars are also going pretty slow as well, so low speeds. It's also generally two-way for people on bikes, even if the street is a one-way for cars. So the goal of a neighborway is to make the street quiet enough that people of all ages and abilities can safely bike in the middle of the street, which I think most people wouldn't do on a lot of streets in Somerville. But if there's little to no traffic, it's a different case. And so that's the goal with the neighborways. So it eliminates, the benefit of that is that it eliminates the need for dedicated bike lanes. Which our streets are already narrow. Often, as we're discussing here, we have to remove a lane of parking to add a bike lane. And so we don't have to do that in this case, except for very short stretches at key intersections along the route. So examples of existing neighborways in Somerville include Hancock Street and Spring Hill, and in the photo here is Glen Street in East Somerville. So in that table on the right, you can also see some of the key characteristics that we use to determine whether or not a street qualifies as a neighborway. Now, as I kind of alluded to, most of Mossland Street won't have to change to become a neighborway. It can remain a one-lane street with parking on both sides. However, there's currently too much traffic right now for it to function as a neighborway today. We can't simply put up some signs and say it's a neighborway. To get there, we need to reduce that traffic volume, and that will primarily require making changes at the intersections on either side of Mossland, up at Elm and down at Somerville Ave. So some options that are currently under consideration, and I want to emphasize that we do not have a plan yet. We're just showing these are the options we're thinking through. And we're just showing a rendering here on the right to get people thinking about what it could potentially look like. Include reversing the direction of Mossland so that traffic flows towards Elm Street instead of towards Somerville Ave. Restricting turns onto and or off of Mossland Street. So one option could be you can only take a right onto Mossland from Somerville Ave, say, and it's one-way northbound, but then you also can only take a right off of Mossland Street when you get up to Elm Street. Or making it a dead end, as shown in this example rendering, which would definitely make it a much less desirable street to travel for almost anyone, except people that live on it. So what do we do next? To determine the best solution for both Mossland Street and for the surrounding network, because as we know, there are a lot of streets and they're all intertwined, we'll be conducting a traffic analysis to better understand the origins and destinations of people that are currently driving on Mossland Street. So this will be similar to the one that we conducted for Central Street earlier this year, where we recently converted Central to one-way, and there were a lot of concerns about impacts to the surrounding network. So we performed an analysis using a program called Streetlight. You can see a snippet from that on the diagram to the right here. And we've we've had pretty good success in terms of how the data we've been able to collect from that and how we might use it for other projects. So we do plan on replicating a similar type of analysis for Mossland Street. So based on how much traffic will have to be routed to other streets and then which streets are most likely to take that traffic, we will then be making adjustments to those intersections to better accommodate this change. For example, if we find that it's likely that more traffic will be routed down to Elm Street where it meets Somerville Ave, we could do things like adding more green time to better handle that additional traffic. However, this project is not all just about bike facilities. The designs that we will be producing can also be expected to have clear corners markings and or signage, depending on some of the exact locations, at all intersections and crosswalks within the project area, which will increase visibility by making it clear that there is no parking allowed with 20 feet of a crosswalk or intersection. We've started to add these markings along a number of different streets in Somerville, and they've been rolled out at the citywide scale in Hoboken, New Jersey, which I'd like to highlight because Hoboken has not had a traffic fatality in over 6 years, which is unfortunately not too common for many cities in the US. So a success story for sure. The designs that we'll be producing can also be expected to recommend modifications to the signals on Somerville Ave, where it meets Mossland Street, Beacon Street, and Elm Street, as well as on Elm, where it meets Cedar and Mossland. This could include simpler changes, such as adding more green time to certain legs of the intersection, but may also include more fundamental changes to the way the intersection currently operates. We'll also be investing in opportunities to upgrade equipment at these intersections, whether that's adding things like countdown timers to the pedestrian signals or cameras that can detect vehicles or pedestrians or bike riders, and then consequently tell the intersection when to give certain legs of the intersection the green light. We'll also be collecting traffic data this fall, which will give us a better sense of how many people are moving through these intersections at various times of day, and that'll help inform our proposals at these intersections. So a lot more data to come and to look at before we start digging into the weeds too much here. We also want to be upfront about the fact that we can't fit everything we want in this design. These streets are sometimes feel really wide when you're a pedestrian or a bike rider, maybe even as a driver. But we'd love to be able to fit a lot more in than we currently can. And if our baseline is adding protected bike lanes, it does mean removing parking on one side of Elm Street, as you may have been able to discern from the previous slide. So this is going to be a big change, and we know that's going to have an impact on people. And to accommodate it, we're going to start by first documenting the existing curb regulations in the area and getting a tally of all the number of spaces. So we've started to do some of that work, as you can see in this image, and then using that as our baseline, our sort of source of truth. We're then going to review community feedback that we get from you all. We're going to take regulations into account that we know are priorities, such as accessible parking and short-term loading zones, and then look for opportunities to make changes on side streets as we begin our redesign. So with your feedback guiding where we prioritize additional changes, we will also be exploring opportunities to implement pedestrian and bus improvements. We'll be looking into crosswalk improvements such as centerline hardening, which call attention to crosswalks and slow down turning vehicles, as seen in the photo on Temple Street here to the right, and bus stop consolidation, which reconsiders where bus stops are located on the street to find the best balance between quick bus trips and more convenient access to and from stops. And with that, I will turn things over to Kate to discuss next steps and community engagement.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this presentation. We're really excited to share this information with you. I'm going to talk a little bit about our anticipated project timeline, and then talk a little bit more about how you can engage. And I'm going to take us to the next slide. Thank you. This project is likely to run from September, right now, to full implementation by December 2025. We are launching first with this community outreach to identify an array of issues on the street. So really this phase, kind of September through October, we just really want to learn from you, learn more about the context, and hear about some of your ideas and priorities. We'll then work from November through January to develop a concept design. And in February, we aim to come back to you all to gather your feedback on the initial design. Your feedback will help shape the final design, which we aim to develop through later March and May, or from later March through May. At this time, we'll also be working closely with our instrument partners, right? When we have the idea of what things could look like, we cross-check turning movements with the fire department. We develop maintenance plans with the Department of Public Works. We check in and we really talk through curb regulations with our parking department. In the summer of 2025, we'll share the final design with you all and begin to bid out the contract. We then work with city contractors, which we look at implementation between September and December 2025. Kind of take that timeline and kind of specifically call out what we really want to learn from you in these different phases. So right now, what we call our kind of pre-concept design, that real learning phase, we really want to, we are looking to you to provide insight into your transportation safety concerns in the area, help us identify critical crosswalks to prioritize and inform types of improvements. We want you to share your bus riding experience and critical transit service concerns, inform which side of parking to maintain per block or street segment, share your experience traveling through the intersections in the project area, and really just help us to better understand the context. Then that next phase, which is during the concept design, kind of seeing early spring, we're really kind of targeting that February timeframe. We look to you to ask questions about the details of the design. We want you to share your feedback on what design elements make you feel safe, provide feedback on the types of parking regulations that best fit the needs of the different blocks, share feedback on the bus stop proposals, and share your overall impressions of the proposed design. And after reviewing all of that input we collected during design development, we'll then work to take that feedback and finalize the design to begin for implementation. In the summer of 2025, we'll work to spread the word about the upcoming changes through a variety of ways, such as informational poster campaigns, street outreach pop-ups, and more, really trying to find ways that work well for you to get out the word. We also want to share that in each of these phases, we'll produce a report cataloging everything that we've heard and kind of everything we did through these phases so that you can see what your neighbors said and you know, maybe what folks said at the street outreach pop-ups. Really want to share that information with you. So really just want to note, per the bicycle network plan, we will be designing protected bike lanes in both directions on Elm-Beacon and Somerville Avenue. We will also implement clear corners like Adam described, which is restricting that parking 20 feet ahead of the crosswalk, as these are required under federal, state, and local regulations. And the city's been working to bring our streets into compliance by installing pavement markings on our higher crash streets to communicate this restriction. So jumping into a few of the opportunities, we aim to provide a variety of ways for community members to be able to engage. This slide lists out some of the opportunities. I'm just going to go through them at a high level. We will launch each community engagement phase with a larger meeting. So right now we're doing this in a virtual meeting. We're anticipating our next one in February to be an in-person open house. We also have surveys where you can detail more of your feedback. At this stage, we aim to hear about your transportation safety concerns and priorities as we described. In February, we'll be looking again for that feedback on the concept design. You can also check out our online public input map where you can add comments directly to a map. So if you're like, I specifically want to talk about this crossing at Elm Street and Porter, you can note that right on the map, and we'll take a physical copy of this map out in our street outreach events. We aim to meet people where they are, so our street outreach events, we're looking at locations that have high pedestrian traffic. We're also looking to do outreach around the Kennedy School so that when parents and children are arriving to school in the morning, they can connect with us, talk with us. We're going to be also connecting with businesses one-on-one, really kind of meeting them on their own time and going business by business to really connect and talk about operational needs. How do employees get to work? Really trying to understand those transportation needs. And then later on in the design development, we also anticipating hosting some other opportunities. We're looking to do some virtual office hours. So if in-person stuff you don't feel as comfortable, but you really want to talk one-on-one with the team, you can sign up for virtual office hours and connect and talk directly. We aim to keep you up to date through each stage of the project. So you'll receive direct emails kind of now that you signed up for this meeting, we're going to send you direct emails to your inbox, just kind of updating you on what's the latest in the project. You can also subscribe to the mobility newsletter where we really try to share all updates about different mobility projects across the city. We're going to be posting printed flyers, sending out social media posts and social media channels, and connecting with our city communications team who send out our larger communications like the city newsletter. You also might see us at lots of citywide events. You might have seen us already at Senior Picnic or Gilman Square Arts Festival. We're going to be at upcoming summer streets such as Monster Mash and Carnival, and other ones that pop over the next 9 to 10 months. And then lastly, we just want to share that we also connect with our transportation-specific city advisory committees and commissions. These are critical advisory groups that advise the city monthly on different elements of transportation projects, and really hear their questions and feedback. So with that, what comes next? Specifically for what's next tomorrow, please check out our webpage. We're going to send you a direct email anyway, but we'll have the survey up and live tomorrow. You can, same with the public input map. And again, subscribe to the Mobility Monthly newsletter for just general project updates. Come talk to us at our next pop-up. We're going to be at the intersection of Beacon Street and Somerville Ave on October 3rd. Again, with it being fall, sometimes we have inclement weather. So if we have some bad weather that day, we'll probably go for October 16th, but check the webpage for updates if you plan on joining. And then we're also looking to be doing some outreach in the coming weeks during Kennedy School arrival. But at any point, feel free to reach out to our team. You can email transportation@somervillema.gov or give us a call through 311 at 617-666-3311. So thank you all for sending in your chat questions. We're really excited to pull those all together. Before we get started in the discussion, we're just going to do one more optional poll just to kind of get a little gut check of like how folks are feeling about the project. I'm just going to launch this now. And then I'm going to read out some of the questions too for folks. So out of the following list of options, please share how you feel at this time about the project. The first is I'm excited about the project. The second is I'm mostly excited, but I have some concerns. The third is I need more information before I can determine how I feel about the project. The fourth is I'm mostly concerned, but I'm excited about some things. Fifth is I'm concerned about the project. And lastly is other. So I'll give you folks a few minutes. And again, we're going to start with written questions. So all those that have come in, if you send in written comments, thank you so much for sharing those. We are logging that, and as I described, we'll be including that in our community engagement report. And it's really critical for us to hear, but given the size of the group this evening, we're really going to focus on questions that we've received in the chat. We're probably going to do this about 20 to 30 minutes and then move to spoken comment. So seeing that I got about 88% of folks or of our attendees have participated, I'll probably give about 30 seconds more, and then I'll end the poll and share out the results. Okay, wonderful. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you all. So as you can see now, with again about 135 attendees participating, we've got 56% said I'm excited about the project, 25% said I'm mostly excited but have some concerns, 4% said I need more information before I can determine how I feel, 4% said I'm mostly concerned but excited about some things, and 11% said I'm concerned about the project. Thank you so much for sharing. We are going to jump into the discussion. And if we don't get to your question today, please don't hesitate to reach out to us by email. Again, we want to provide lots of different opportunities for folks to participate. Just a few instructions for our discussion this evening. As I mentioned, we're going to focus on the questions and then move to spoken questions and comments. We're going to take, and when we move to spoken questions and comments, we're going to go in the order of the hands. I'll give you a cue of where you're at. So I'll say potentially there's 10 folks with their hands raised. Up next is, Jennifer. The following two are George and Liam. If you're joining by phone and you want to raise your hand, you can press *9. And then when we go to unmute, you can press *6. So we'll have that up when we get to the spoken section. But as it's about 6:43 now, we're going to move into written questions. So first is a question about intersection configurations. Adam, can you talk a little bit about, can the Beach Street Willow Ave intersection with Elm be reconfigured for safety as part of the project?
The short answer is yes. We will definitely be looking at Beach Willow, Elm as part of this project. Now, keep in mind that we can't move curbs, so that could pose some challenges and limit a little bit what we're doing. But we know that that is a big, scary intersection that does not function very well right now. So we will absolutely be looking for opportunities to make changes there, narrow up the cross section, try to find better ways for people to cross. We know that that Willow Beach connection, whether you're driving or biking or walking, is really challenging. So yeah, we definitely will be looking at opportunities to make improvements there because we know it does not function very well today. And that is one that we're specifically, we know we're going to have to collaborate with the city of Cambridge on, because the back of the city line is right at the back of sidewalk there. And so anything that impacts beach will be impacting them.
Thanks, Adam. Our next question is about kind of the material used to create separation. Can stronger separation like concrete be used to protect people in the bicycle lanes?
Yeah, I'd say our default right now is FlexPost. This is a really big project area, and we do have limited funding to build this project. However, I think we definitely want to push the envelope. And if there is an opportunity to build something more substantial, like precast concrete curbs, I think we want to keep that option open to ourselves right now. So I'm not going to make a commitment at this time either way. And I think that is the kind of thing that will definitely depend on funding. Like I said, it is a 2 mile, it's 2 miles worth of protected bike lanes. The corridor is big. And so that cost does add up really quickly. We're also trying those for the first time, fingers crossed, this fall on Western Washington Street, if everything goes well. So depending on how that sort of first implementation goes, we may have some lessons learned that we can take going into a project like this next year. So definitely something we're keeping in our back pocket. I'd say the flex posts are the default, but we want to try to push the envelope and see if we can consider something more substantial, and if that makes sense.
Thanks, Adam. The next question is also about about an intersection configuration. Is elimination of the Elm Street Somerville Ave slip lane out of the scope of this project? And if so, is it something the city is considering for the future?
That is out of the scope of the project at this time. It is definitely something we are considering for the future. I think ultimately that gets turned into a pocket park or additional pedestrian space in some way. However, it doesn't really fit into the realm of a quick build project like this. So we will be not touching that particular little leg there with that slip lane between Somerville Ave and Elm Street heading northbound.
Thanks, Adam. I'm seeing some questions come in kind of around the neighborway and kind of just like, again, does it include two-way traffic? Does it not? It might be helpful. Would you still to kind of uh, reiterate what is a neighborway and what does allow for bikes and what are some of our goals with neighborways?
Yeah, definitely. And you know what? I'm going to go back a few slides. I think it'll be better at least have the slide up while I'm talking through it. Nope, and I went too far. Let the computer catch up. I think this is probably the best slide to show. So a neighborway on a very simple level, you can think of as just a slow, low volume street. So I'm sure you all can think of one or two in your neighborhood that maybe you use it once in a while, or you know it's there, but you've never actually gone down it, but doesn't carry much traffic. There's not really a lot of reason for anyone to use it except people that live on that street. Those really low volume streets that also aren't typically very fast could make good neighborways without us really having to do much. The thing that makes it a neighborway then is that we sort of we will do what we did in this photo here, and we'll add like a 20-foot section of bike lane. We'll throw a sign up there that says this is a neighborway. We'll add it to the maps that we distribute throughout the city into folks, and we make it clear that it is a safe bike connection. So it's really trying to create a network around Somerville that isn't part of our protected bike lane network on all of the main streets, like in Elm or Somerville Ave, like Broadway, for example. Those are all really busy streets that it's never going to be safe for someone to not to take the lane, right? Most people won't feel comfortable riding in the same lane as a motor vehicle, so we need protected bike lanes there. Neighborways, that's not the same case. So they're really low volume streets that that don't carry a lot of traffic. And so most of the time someone riding a bike is just not going to encounter another car, and that inherently is a lot safer for someone on a bike and more people feel comfortable. So really then all you need to do is make sure that there aren't any conflicts, there aren't any cars, you know, trying to exit or enter the street when someone on a bike is trying to leave at an intersection. Those are always the toughest points. And so this photo here is an example of how you can give just a little bit of space near the intersection to allow someone to safely maneuver, whether they're on the bike or they're in the car, and allow everyone to kind of safely interact, and then they can go back and kind of go on their merry way and don't have to worry about any interaction. So it can really be a pretty low impact tool that we have at our disposal to build out our bike network in a way that isn't just about protected bike lanes, right? And so for Mossland Street, that is not currently the state today. Mossland Street does carry like 3,000 cars a day right now. That's not as high as Elm Street or Somerville Ave or Beacon Street, but it is more than it would feel comfortable to just say that bikes and cars can share the same lane. And so what we have to do is we have to go in and we have to make it a less desirable street to drive on. And as I discussed, there are a few options that we're considering. We might be able to just reverse the direction of Mossland Street. However, I think we have to do the traffic analysis that we're going to conduct to determine whether or not that would reduce it far enough, or if there's still a lot of demand for people to drive northbound. We could restrict some of those turns, or you could make it a dead end. If it's a dead end, only people that live on that street are going to want to drive on it. So that would definitely be an effective way to do that. And as seen in this diagram here, you could still provide 5 feet for bikes to enter and exit the street safely. So I hope that starts to get at some of what we're trying to achieve and how we might achieve it. But it's really just about making sure it's designating the street for bikes with just some of these, you know, signs and just minimal markings at intersections. But it's really just making it a safe, slow, calm street that you don't need a dedicated bike lane for.
Thanks, Adam. Thank you all for your questions. I'm going to kind of put some together as some are kind of similar. We have a couple around clear corners. This is around like kind of what will they look like? Will all of them include pavement markings and bollards? And I can help answer that one. So as Adam described, we are really looking at adding pavement markings on most of these locations and or signage. We really are actually looking to you to help us identify critical crosswalks. We've been starting to hear some of that feedback as we announced this meeting about like where are really key ones, maybe especially for families traveling to the school that they cross. This image helps you see that the markings kind of indicate this is a no parking area. And when you don't have vehicles there, right, all of a sudden we can see there are children in the crosswalk, there's a vehicle approaching from the left, and there's other adults in the other crosswalk. We primarily use flex posts in our clear corners areas in kind of very heavily trafficked areas. So for example, if you're in Ball Square, we implemented some a couple years ago. We placed them there because it's highly commercial. There might be many deliveries, or there might be many quick pickups, and we really just want to ensure those intersections stay clear. And so that's where we might use some more kind of substantial blocking rather than just markings. One of the next questions was around deliveries, which I thought this was a good segue into, are we considering deliveries and needs throughout this when we're really looking at parking impacts? And as Adam described, we're kind of looking at current regulations and future regulations. We are very much thinking of how do we accommodate the high amount of deliveries that we know, not only that businesses receive, but they might be doing deliveries to their customers, in addition to like the deliveries that we might receive at our homes. And so we're really looking to how do we create what we call that short-term parking. You might see some of our loading zone signage across the city. We've pivoted away from kind of your more traditional where it says commercial loading to signs that indicate with pictures that it can be done for commercial delivery. With big trucks, it can be used for quick food pickup or even passenger pickup if you're picking up a Lyft, Uber, or taxi. And so we're going to be really looking at that's going to be important in our one-on-one business conversations, in addition to hearing from you on kind of what you've seen on the street. And as Adam included the picture from before, we see some of this happen kind of on our unprotected bike lanes on Somerville Avenue right now. And so really, where do we create space that can be really helpful? We also got some questions around kind of curb needs, or what we would call curb needs, around the Kennedy School during pickup and drop off. And this again is a critical conversation for us during this project. We are really eager to talk to school administration and to kind of get into the details in addition to conducting observations to just better understand how does school pickup and drop off operate, and how do we ensure that that can still safely happen when we make changes to the street. So kind of understanding maybe the range of cars that do it, where do they kind of go? We'll be having those conversations early on in the project, and ensuring that school pickup and drop off can occur safely is really important to us. And again, goes up on the priority list when we think about parking use, or kind of parking regulations on the street with the one-sided parking that will remain. Just had another question quickly around kind of the 5-year paving plan. This kind of the historical context, why wasn't this dangerous intersection included in the 5-year plan and being resorted to quick build? The city recently launched a new pavement and sidewalk management program site. We've included the URL in these slides here. We'll also include that in the follow-up email to you after this meeting later this week. But it really goes into the detail about how our streets selected. We're really looking at the quality of the pavement and quality of the sidewalks, some really coarse accessibility concerns, such as, are there curb ramps? Are there not? And so there's a lot that goes into it. And so sometimes it's that there are some other of those values rose to the top, and the intersection. I think this person, they didn't highlight here, but it came in the time that we're kind of talking about Somerville Ave and Beacon. That was more recently repaved. And so some of those kind of like critical infrastructure quality didn't reach some of the levels that some of our other locations have in the city. So maybe I'll jump to another question around scope. Adam, we got a question around, can White Street be added to scope so that bikes can go contraflow on that street? And maybe we can just kind of reiterate the scope of this project.
Yeah, so our focus is definitely on Elm, Somerville Ave, Beacon, and Mossland. Like I mentioned, we are also doing a traffic analysis. So if there are streets that are impacted where we need to consider other types of changes, I think we're going to keep an open mind on that front. But we really are, in terms of like what we're trying to deliver, it's safety improvements to those 4 streets that we've been talking about. It would really only be as a mitigation strategy that we'd consider any sort of adjacent streets that may be impacted by the Mossland change. White Street is also actually a City of Cambridge street for the most part. I think we own maybe the sidewalk. And so at a minimum, we'd have to collaborate with the City of Cambridge to get anything to happen there. But at this time, White Street is not within the scope from the perspective of adding any bike facilities or making any kind of bike changes for us right now. It's just purely based on making sure, if it were, it would just be based on traffic mitigation impacts.
Thanks, Adam. So next I have a couple that are really about kind of like lane configuration at intersections. First, we have one that says, notably I believe that the turn lane currently on Beacon could turn either left or right, not just right. If we decide to keep a turn lane, will it change to right only?
Most likely, yes. We've been doing some preliminary exercises, and there are still benefits to keeping 2 travel lanes there because it can, you can hold that right and allow left turns to go, while the crosswalk across Somerville Ave on the sort of the east side or the right side of Beacon, if you're looking up Beacon at Somerville Ave, those can go at the same time, and there's no conflict there. So that then allows more people, whether you're walking or driving, to move through an intersection. So there are benefits to that, and that is something we're considering. We will only have 1 receiving lane on Somerville Ave at the end of this project. We just don't have room for both, and honestly, it doesn't provide a lot of value from a traffic capacity perspective. So we will only have the single. It will only be the 1 left turn lane at the end of this project.
Okay, next I have another one about turns. There's heavy motorist right turning volumes, both from Elm to Beacon and from Beacon to Oxford. How do we prevent right hook crashes via either spatial or temporal signal timing separation?
That's a very good question. I think that's the kind of detail that we're going to get into a little bit more as we start to really dig into the details of the design. I think we're starting to hone in, as you know, everyone can tell, on sort of the cross section and what's going to be where. The intersections are going to follow that, and so we'll definitely be digging more over the next few months into exactly how we're going to achieve that. As I kind of started to describe with the right turn, there are trade-offs between providing more space for people to, to separate people on bikes or people walking from moving motor vehicle traffic. But there's sort of an interplay there between, how much green time you can then give to any given leg of the intersection, and how quickly people can move through that intersection. So I think those are things that we're definitely exploring, and Somerville Ave definitely provides an opportunity to narrow the cross section and at a minimum provide pockets of protected turns for people on bikes and to shorten crossings for people walking. So we're definitely going to be digging into that more as we start up the design process.
Thanks, Adam. One question we got was, will we please describe in more detail? Sorry. They like to know whether plan changes are based on evidence that can actually reduce accidents. So thank you very much for this question. We are actually happy, and we could share some of the resources that we have from the National Association of City Transportation Officials around how do protected facilities really increase safety for people biking, along with things like clear corners. And just actually recently, I believe in the last year, the U.S. Department of Transportation released a report saying how protected bike lanes truly do increase safety and reduce fatalities, and which is quite a large thing for the U.S. Department of Transportation, which primarily focuses on highways, but has really been dedicating a lot more work to safe streets investment, especially with their work in their Safe Streets for All. And so we'd be happy to share those resources. We don't have that off the top of head, and I think this is looking for, specific data and evidence. But we can share many of those resources to show how protected facilities, and we get into that a little bit in the Somerville Bicycle Network Plan, which we can link in the materials sent to you by email afterwards. So some of the, just going to dig in, we got quite a few questions, so we're probably going to go about 30 minutes. So we got one around Elm Street and Beach Street. The person describes how this intersection is always downright scary to cross on foot or by bike without repaving or bumping out curbs. How can this intersection be made safer for non-cars?
Sure. So we can actually kind of mimic a curb extension with paint and flex posts. You can sort of design it in a way that you would with a curb, but using those types of materials. And maybe it's not a flex post, maybe it's something a little bit more substantial on corners of streets where we really want to beef up the protection. But at a minimum, we know that that intersection is much wider than it needs to be, and there's a lot of space to make changes there. So we will likely be installing more vertical separation, like I said, whether it's flex posts or precast concrete curb. We've been trying out a couple of other different styles of products around the city. If you've been over on Grand Union Boulevard in Assembly recently, we're trying these things called zippers and armadillos. And so there are a number of different ways that we can kind of achieve the same safety benefit without necessarily doing it with curbs and concrete. And so we're going to, at a minimum, be looking to see how narrow we can get that cross section, and just sort of minimizing the opportunity for conflict between moving motor vehicle traffic and bikes or pedestrians.
So next we have a question about the intersection of Somerville Ave and Elm Street. One attendee shared that turning from Somerville to Elm is difficult. Many folks cut through the business parking lot. Are there plans to address this? Dedicated left turn or close off the cut through?
That's a very helpful piece of information. That's good to know. I know that I can say for one that, not having spent a ton of time at that particular intersection, that I was not aware that that was a frequent occurrence. So these are the kinds of things that we want to learn from you all as we're starting up this process. We can definitely keep that in mind. I think that particular intersection has a little bit less room, so I don't know off the top of my head whether or not we'll have the space to add a dedicated left turn lane, but there may be different ways to achieve that and sort of prevent that cheating, that cut through movement, and making that intersection flow a little bit better for everyone, a little bit safer for everyone. So don't have a good answer for you yet, but that is part of why we're here. And that's exactly what we're trying to learn at this stage of the process so that we can incorporate that into our designs and our thinking as we start to put pencil to paper.
Great, so we have one around lane widths. So one question is it possible to make the driving lanes narrower? 11 feet lanes on Cambridge Street feels a bit wide. The bike lanes on Elm are somewhat narrow. According to NACDO, lane widths of 10 feet are appropriate in urban areas. So is it possible to narrow them?
Yeah, we're definitely trying to strike a balance with the lane widths. I think on non-bus routes, 10 feet is our standard for projects that we're going to be designing going forward. The MBTA has a strong preference for 11 feet, so that is going to be our default at this time. There may be certain opportunities at pinch points or in very short stretches to make it a little bit narrower than that, and we may have to if we want to try to accommodate all the things that we want to in this design. But at this time, our default is going to be 11 feet. We do have an example of narrower lanes on a bus route on Holland Street, and we have found that there have been some issues with buses being able to navigate that street at certain locations. And so I think we do want to make sure, it hasn't been called out as explicitly to date, but we do want to make sure that buses are also able to move while not giving extra, any extra width that we can, because we also know that narrow travel lanes help keep speeds low. So it's a balance we're trying to strike, but at this time our default is going to be 11 feet.
Thanks, folks. So I know I said about 20 minutes, or just doing a quick time check. We have still quite a few questions and about 7 hands raised. So I'm going to do some more questions, and probably in about 5 or so minutes, we'll pivot to spoken comment. Again, if we didn't get to your question tonight, we are collecting all of these, and that's going to help us kind of put together more material to go through this outreach phase. In addition, please feel free to reach out directly to us. We really want to help get you answers. So the next question is around the light cycles. The light cycle for travel from Mawson Street to Beacon Street is extremely long, resulting in people biking or pedestrians proceed against a red light or don't walk indication. Will the timing of this light be adjusted to allow more frequent access from Mawson Street?
The short answer is yes. We've had this intersection in our sites for a while already. And because the equipment is so old and we'd need to make a bunch of changes to change how it functions better, and we definitely know it can function better than it does today. No one gets a lot of time in the current standard. So Mawson gets its own green while everyone else is red. Beacon gets its own green while everyone else is red. Same thing with both approaches to Somerville Ave. And then there's a dedicated phase per pedestrians. And to even give everyone, I think it's about 20 seconds right now for each. That ends up being 100 seconds. That's close to 2 minutes, right? And so everyone's waiting for a long time and doesn't get a lot of green time. We will definitely be looking into whether we can make changes to improve that. I will, remind everyone that if Mawson Street becomes a neighbor way, there is not going to be much of a desire for people to cut through there. And so it likely won't need much green time if we do our jobs right, because there aren't going to be that many cars coming off of Mawson. So say you're a resident asking this question, though, the idea is that it would serve you better.
So we have one question around, does the city view this as last word on redesigns for the stretch of Elm and Somerville vis-a-vis Summer Vision 2040? Is there a chance for revisiting this area with concrete before 2040? It's a great question. Again, as we mentioned, the pavement plan is iterative and we have the next 5 years plan. I think there's definitely opportunities before 2040. Our goal in the bicycle network plan is that we have this commitment by 2030 to complete kind of our base network, which we call our priority network, really the kind of backbone of the network by 2030, with either physical or constructed protected bike lanes or quick build, but longer term, those quick build will turn into more permanent. So when we have the opportunities to construct, we definitely want to come back and look at more kind of permanent opportunities. One thing we know, the opportunity with quick build is it allows us to learn and adjust later. We are more limited, but then we can say, oh, maybe we would kind of change this over here. Maybe we configure this intersection a little bit differently. So this is really kind of the first step in kind of that longer term vision of what these streets could look like. So I'll just take a few more. We actually had some questions around kind of Kennedy School pickup and drop off and kind of the use of sometimes of the nearby Porter Square lots. Those are great questions. I think we really want to first start with kind of really understanding the full picture of school arrival and dismissal. And so we're going to be having those conversations with school administration, parents, and you all. To really kind of understand, but we're going to be really focused on what we call the public right of way. So what we can do with this within the public street. But again, we want to first learn before we kind of say this is exactly how it should look. We're just going to comb through more. Okay, here we go. So we've got some other kind of really digging into some of the details of different intersections. Adam, can you talk a little bit about, like, in this part of this project, will all intersections have a kind of no turn on red sign or law implemented?
Where that is relevant, which would be at any signalized intersection with a traffic light, at any of those intersections, I think we would very likely be implementing no turn on red. I'd have to confirm that 100% with our traffic engineer to make sure that it fits our criteria, but generally speaking, most intersections and signalized intersections in the city do fit the no turn on red criteria. And so, excuse me, that would likely be implemented as part of the effort. Yes. Was there more to that question, Kate? Or was it mostly around that?
No, at this time, I think that was the majority. And again, thanks folks for sending your questions. With there being about 150 so folks on the call, we've had quite a few. So we're just trying to make sure to capture as much as possible and combine some where we see some similarities. We did have another around intersections. Just bear with me one moment. Oh, I think this was around bike signals. Does the project include potentially dedicated bike signals at these intersections?
Short answer is yes. It doesn't always make sense to install those depending on exactly what you're trying to achieve and what goes where. But it's definitely something that we're going to be keeping in mind. And if it does make sense to include dedicated bike signals, and I could definitely see a couple of situations in which it would make sense, then yes, that is definitely on the table.
So I got a crosswalk question. With raised crosswalks and raised intersections not being in scope, how can we slow down vehicles at the intersection of Elm with Hancock, Elm with Hancock and White in the Porter Square Shopping Center parking lot? Crossing Elm Street at this intersection is very dangerous, and drivers are often traveling too fast, including those coming out of the Porter Square Shopping Center.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I definitely know that area and totally agree with those concerns. I will definitely say that physical traffic calming interventions are our most effective means to achieve serious vehicle speed reduction, and don't want to, just want to be upfront about that. So that is a drawback of this particular project type. It doesn't mean that there still aren't things we can do, right? So we described some of that centerline hardening, which can create a lot of visual friction and really narrow the roadway up for people. We will be narrowing the road altogether, and so there will be multiple objects in the street that will make drivers not want to go as fast there. But we will be limited to those particular interventions. And we're going to do our best to get creative and to lean on some of those flex post style tactics to reduce vehicle speeds to the degree we can, and emphasize that there are crosswalks here. But it will be with those tools. And so you have probably seen some of the things we've done around the city. The Temple Street example is a good one. In some cases, we have red-backed crosswalks. I don't know whether or not we're going to go in that direction for this project, but we continue to iterate and think through different ways that we can try to get people to move slower. Maybe it's moving the parking side back and forth and creating kind of a chicane effect. We're definitely going to be thinking about that and seeing what opportunities we have, knowing that it's not going to have the same effect as a raised intersection or a raised crosswalk, and want to be honest about that. But it doesn't mean that these aren't the kinds of things that we can make a step towards making safer and creating an opportunity for more changes down the road.
So I'm going to give you one more question, and then we're going to move into spoken comment. Thank you all again for sending your questions. Could you comment on Adelaide Road? It is disguised as a driveway and causes a lot of confusion at the Somerville-Beacon intersection.
Yes, I'm aware of Adelaide Road, and it will be included in the signal timing plan and phasing plan that we developed for that intersection. And the goal is to make it a little bit clearer when folks can and can't go, and make that a little bit safer. So that's not just running concurrently with Beacon Street, which is obviously not super safe today. So, yep, we're aware, and we'll make sure it's included in the plan.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you everyone again for your questions. So now moving to spoken comment, we have about 10 hands raised. I'm going to say the first 3 names and kind of keep doing that throughout the spoken time. We are going to try and move through as many people as possible. This meeting is scheduled till 7:30. We're happy to stay on for a bit longer, but we want to respect folks' time. We will be closing out at 8 p.m. So first we'll start with Itamar Turner Troring. We'll then move to Alex Epstein and then Kelsey Lamp. Itamar, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, apologies if this got answered, I missed it. I live at the corner of Oxford and there's like a whole long list of things this will make better in our life. But specifically the intersection of Oxford and Beacon is extremely dangerous. Like we woke up one day to police and there's a crushed bike and there's a person who just barely escaped being crushed to death by a truck. Crossing in one direction is almost impossible. Crossing the other direction you can do, but you have to look in 3 directions. Cars are constantly running the stoplight. It's just turning left from Beacon onto Oxford as a bicyclist, extremely dangerous. Turning left from Oxford onto Somerville is extremely dangerous. It's just bad. And the original design is supposed to have a traffic light for Beacon Street, and then somewhere like the 3rd revision, like they dropped it. That was a mistake. Is there any chance that come back? And if not, like it's just a bad intersection. If anything you can do to like improve it would be great.
Thanks, Itamar. Yeah, so it's highly unlikely that we'll be adding any new traffic signals as part of this effort. It's really going to be more focused around the ones that exist today. But we can definitely take that feedback into consideration. It's right at the edge of the project limit, but I know that that's definitely not a great crossing right now. And there are opportunities to make some changes there as part of this project that I think could have an effect on improving the safety there. At a minimum, just changing where that double lane starts and moving that a little bit further away from the crosswalk is one thing I can think of off the top of my head. But anyway, to just narrow it down further, I think will go a long ways. So definitely something that we can keep in mind as we start on that part of the effort.
Great, thank you, Itamar. Next we'll have Alex, followed by Kelsey Lamp and Joel Paul. Alex, you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, thank you, Kate, and apologies for child noise in the background. I am a Kennedy parent, so there's a Kennedy child making some sounds. I'm very excited about this project. I live just up Hancock Street from Elm, and this is an everyday route to and from school. So this is long overdue. Really happy. I think you've answered some of my questions already regarding, for example, Beach Street intersection. Look forward to seeing definitely some focus on the Hancock White Porter Shopping Center intersection there, including interaction with the bus stop. It would be great to see White Street implemented as a neighborway to connect to the existing Hancock Street neighborway as part of the project, if possible, to maximize the grid connectivity of the bike network, since that's in the bike network plan. So I'm just putting in a vote for that, if possible. And I do wonder if it's possible to work with the Porter Square Shopping Center to possibly restrict the access directions into and out of that intersection to simplify it. So flagging that as maybe an issue and an opportunity, that it is a 2-way entrance there at that corner, which definitely complicates and adds additional conflicts between different turning movements. So any way that could be addressed would be great. So thank you. Looking forward to the engagement with the Kennedy School. This will definitely improve my confidence letting my kid ride and walk to school. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. So next we have Kelsey Lant, followed by Joel Paul, then I-Ping. Kelsey, you should be able to unmute now.
Yeah, I am mostly, well, first I just want to say I'm very excited about this project and thank you for this very clear presentation. I live on Ashland Street and commute into downtown Boston most of the week. So I definitely am crossing that Elm Street, White Street, Hancock Street intersection quite often. And that is the one place in the city where I feel like I've almost been run over several times. So I'm very excited to hear that that is already on your radar and you're considering it. Want to echo, like, I definitely think working with the parking lot to reorient how traffic flows could be huge. The sort of cars waiting for each other to turn into and out of the parking lot have often been blocking the sight lines of people who want to speed on by. So I think whatever we can do to block people from feeling like they can maneuver around cars turning into that parking lot or eliminating some of that altogether would be really helpful. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight was the intersection at Cherry Street, the crosswalk there. It would be really great to focus on not just daylighting that intersection with the 20-foot barrier, but also making sure to narrow the street as possible, if possible, towards that intersection. I just feel like people really speed into that intersection blocked by cars and then really want to turn onto Elm quickly. And so I often feel unsafe there as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kelsey. Next we have Joel, followed by I-Ping, then Kate Van Sleet. And just want to let folks know we've got 11 folks with their hands raised. Joel, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, I'm Joel. I drive, I take transit, and I bike, but most of my interactions with this intersection, especially Mossland, getting onto Oxford, are on bike, and it's very unpleasant at the moment. So I'm very appreciative of the steps that are being taken to improve this. Yeah, especially turning from Oxford onto Beacon is very challenging right now. So if there's any way to kind of, especially with cars are like all the way up past the crosswalk trying to like nudge in because the cars going up Beacon towards Somerville Ave are always blocking that intersection. Nobody can get in or out. So it's hard to see around traffic there. So that's just wanted to comment on that. But thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Next we have I-Ping, followed by Kate Van Sleet and Ilu. I-Ping, you should be able to unmute now. I-Ping, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, sorry. I'm very excited. I live on Mossland Street. So, and right now, I live here, the traffic so high. It's like, especially rush hours, sometimes even at 9 or almost 10, it's impossible for me to get out of my driveway. So that's one reason, and the other is like a lot of bikes. I just think it's not safe for the bikers. And it's not safe for me too, because it's just so crowded. There is 2 cars parking on both ends, both sides, sorry, and bicycles was running down. There's really not much room there. I'm very excited, like you change to either a dead end or any like another direction. I think it's really great, like to change the neighborhood way. I'm really expecting this day come sooner. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. Next, sorry, just give me one second. So next we have Kate Van Sleet, followed by Elu, followed by David. And then again, we have about 10 folks with their hands raised. Kate, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. That was very helpful. I don't live in the neighborhood, but my children go to the Kennedy School. And I travel through that area quite frequently to commute to work. I just wanted to flag just a couple of things just in terms of pickup and drop off. I've been a Kennedy School parent for, over 10 years now. And so I have seen a lot in my time dropping and picking up the kids. Couple things to note, that area on Elm Street that's right in front of the school parking lot, that signage for that area, and it is enforced, is that you can't actually leave your car to drop your kid off. So that is very problematic for a pre-K to 8 school where you can't drop, you have to actually walk your kid when they're pre-K to grade 2 to the teacher. So that eliminates that section. I mean, I think that section fits about 4 or 5 cars. And then, as you know, that there's very limited parking in that area anyway. And so parents often will use that lot, which I know they shouldn't do, but they do out of necessity. The lot that's meant for the overflow and workers at the Porter Square shopping center. So I don't know if I know they've looked into doing an arrangement possibly, and I know you mentioned that on your presentation, but just want to underscore that it is very tricky already for parents dropping their kids off, and that signage does not help. I don't even have kids that are pre-K to grade 2, but I'm going to stick up for them anyway. And then the other thing to note is it gets even more complicated if there's any kind of snowfall, because, like everywhere else in Somerville, it limits the number of parking spots, and it's already a very challenging area. So I'm glad that you're going to be talking to the parents and to the school. I'm sure they can elaborate even further, but just wanted to put that plug in for that particular challenge for the younger kids and their parents.
Thank you so much for sharing, Kate. So next we have Elu, followed by David, followed by Seth, and again with about 10 folks with their hands raised. Elu, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thanks so much. My name's Yuliu Balibanu. I live up toward the north end of Oxford Street in Cambridge, technically, but thank you for allowing me on this meeting regardless. First of all, thank you to all of the presenters tonight for all of your hard work on this. It's awesome to see this project getting underway. A couple of things I wanted to mention, and these are all kind of centered around my bike commute to Davis, which I do frequently for medical appointments and for shopping. You had mentioned wanting to put in more trees. Somewhere that could desperately use them is the south side of Somerville Ave as it goes along the commuter rail tracks. I know that in the past, the trees there have had issues because of gas leaks killing them, apparently, but that is very much a heat island. The other thing I wanted to mention is coming toward Oxford Street, so from Somerville down Beacon and toward Oxford Street. Others have already mentioned that it's really easy to get right hooked, both at Roseland Street and then again at Oxford Street. Drivers tend to come with quite a lot of speed. They're not looking behind them and to the right because the bike lane just showed up. Would be really concerned about adding a layer of parking in between the car lane and the bike lane there, since that would just make the visibility worse. I'd be strongly inclined to have the parking on the other side of the street, and if possible, along with other protections to prevent right hooks at those two intersections. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is right now, there's no really good way to get from the Beacon Street Somerville intersection up to Elm on a bike, because you have to kind of go all the way around to the intersection of Somerville and Elm by the gas station, or you have to go by the Porter Shopping Center parking lot where you're going the wrong way up a one-way street or you're going through the parking lot itself. It would be awesome if either Mossland Street or that street by the parking lot, which I believe is White Street, were made into an option for bikes to get from Somerville Avenue to Elm, since it's really a huge pain to bike all the way around down eastward to then get where you're going to the west. Thanks again. Have a great night.
Thanks, Yuliu. I do want to just chime in on that one and mention that the idea is that Mossland Street will become a north and southbound connection for cyclists to get up and down. So that's definitely our intention, is to make that a safe two-way connection.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'll just also note that there was a similar question in the chat around trees. And if we'll be working with our urban forestry division around opportunities, and that helped me remember to say it now, we will definitely be working with them. And it's part of our kind of standard operating procedure to connect with our team and see what are opportunities for potential new trees or what would they need. Wonderful. So next we have David, followed by Seth, followed by Clara. David, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi. So first, I just want to say I think the project as you've presented is really fantastic. I'm really in favor of everything that you guys have shown. I think it's great. I want to bring a perspective I haven't heard exactly yet, which is I think it's fantastic that you're acknowledging the importance of Mossland as an important connection, you know, kind of alluding to what the previous commenter said, but also Cedar Street is a really important connection for those of us coming down from the community path, kind of cutting across town, and Mossland is a really big part of that. And I know you've said that paving is out of the scope of this project, and I understand that, especially when it comes to Elm and Somerville Ave, because as you've said, they were paved in the not too distant past, and by Somerville standards, they're not too bad. Mossland is not good, and it is not currently on the 5-year paving plan as I see it. I would really strongly encourage you to reconsider including paving, because it is bad. And as you've acknowledged, it's a really important connection. And when I bike down there, I am not looking at traffic because my eyes are glued to the road, because they have to be. Otherwise, I'll wipe out on the very large potholes. It's really bad. And it's less than 400 feet long. So that really does feel like it could be included. I understand, you know, capital investment, blah, 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 scope creep, all that good stuff. But just, I want to put in a vote for considering including paving of Mossland, because it's bad. So thank you.
Thank you, David. So next we have Seth, followed by Clara, followed by Drew. And then we've got 9 folks kind of with their hands raised. Seth, oh, actually, no, sorry, Seth, I accidentally clicked on Claire. So Claire, how about you go first, then we'll go Seth, then Drew. Claire, do you want to, you should be able to unmute now. Claire, I see you're unmuted, but we don't hear anything. Claire, are you there? At this time, we're not able to hear anything, and we'll come back in a little bit. So next we'll go to Seth. Seth, you should be able to unmute now.
Hey, thanks so much for doing this project. It is kind of huge, and there's so many interesting nooks and crannies that everyone has a lot to say about, which I think is awesome. Longtime Somerville resident. I used to live off of Porter Street. I commuted down Elm Street almost every day to get to my job in Leechmere via bike for a long time. Also taken the bus through there many times. This street means a lot to me. It was the first time I ever saw somebody get hit on a bike by a car. It was right in front of the Kennedy School, with a car trying to turn left into the to drop off their kid, and a car going around the right of them and clipping a cyclist who was right to the right. So I knew I had to come to this meeting and chat about it, because, you know, I don't know, you don't forget that stuff. So I don't have a child, but I appreciate all the work that you're going to put in to talk to the Kennedy School and make try and see if we can make that safer. No real no real questions, just thanks for doing this. Excited to attend the other meetings and see the updates. Thanks.
Thank you very much for sharing, Seth. So I was able to connect with Claire via the chat. And Claire's question had a question around surveying businesses about the impacts to them, and I'm happy to field that one. So as we described, after this launch, we kind of start a bunch of our different types of outreach. That includes kind of going to each business and talking with them one-on-one on the street. And so our team will be doing that over the next couple weeks to really dig into operational needs, how do their employees travel to the street, and really just kind of connecting with them around what are the potential curbside needs. So next we have Drew, followed by Amy, followed by Marguerite, with about a total of 7 folks in the queue. So next, Drew, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, hi. So I'm a student at Tufts. I use all 3 of these streets, Somerville Ave, Mossland, and Elm, almost every day. I also do a lot of work with the e-bike lending library. So I will take a blue bike, drop it off at the Elm and White street intersection, and then head over, grab bikes, and we loan those out to the community. My first question is, what is proposed to be done with the blue bikes dock at Elm and White? And then I'll also echo some of the input about White Street being a through street for bikes who are going kind of northeast from Porter Square to Elm. That's kind of the only option we have. It's not the safest, but it is safer than going through the parking lot, just because people are backing up and turning, and it's so yeah, I would love to see that included in some of your proposals.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, Adam, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna answer Drew's question about the blue bike station, which is that it will ultimately end up depending where parking remains. So I would say our default option is to keep it in the parking lane, but that exact location may shift slightly. So that's something that we're gonna have to keep in mind as we start that design process. Excuse me, it is also our goal to get as many of our blue bike stations off the street as possible and onto sidewalks so that we don't have to worry about them getting hit by cars, moving them in the winter, things like that. And so if there is any other opportunity to keep it in that area but move it somewhere else slightly, we're going to be looking into that as well. So we don't have a good answer yet, but that's something that we'll definitely be keeping in mind and want to keep it as close as possible, regardless of whether it not stays on the street or moves off on the sidewalk.
Thank you so much, Drew. So next we have Amy, then Marguerite, then Jody, with about 6 folks in the queue. Amy, you should be able to unmute now.
Yes, hi. Thanks so much for a great presentation. I know it's in the very initial phase, but it was very clear, and there are going to be some great improvements. I guess I really have sort of some general comments, which thinking about that there was a cyclist killed a couple days ago in Cambridge, and there have been 2 other folks killed in Cambridge within the last few months. And it seems like a lot of times these deaths or serious accidents happen at intersections. And so just asking, I know you've mentioned it and I appreciate that very much, but really these are some major streets, so keeping an eye on the prize, which is the intersections where people have to turn in terms of serious potential accidents, and also speed. So this recent accident, at least the report is that the person was speeding, but we know that a lot of times, so we've in this meeting, people have talked about people going very fast in places. So what can be done to calm speeds and to think about that as a major factor. Because we know with Vision Zero that the slower the speed, the less likely for the serious accident or death. And then trucks, which I don't know if anybody's talked about yet, but a couple of the recent deaths in Cambridge had to do with trucks. And so where are there trucks? Where will there be trucks? And just thinking about that as you're planning. So that's what's on my mind today, but I really appreciate your efforts and I'm really looking forward to this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And thank you for sharing that. Next we have Marguerite, followed by Jody, followed by John. So Marguerite, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, thank you. It's been a great presentation, but a couple points I just wanted to raise. One is regarding the Kennedy School. Let me also start by saying is I own a house on Mossland Street, as well as a business in the direct impact neighborhood that these changes are going to be made. In regards to pick up and drop off for the Kennedy School, twice a day, being in the morning and the afternoon, generally they park on Holyoke Road and limits the ability for residents to park there. If anybody comes home early from work between 2 and 3 o'clock, there's nowhere to park, just to raise that. So limiting the parking will be an issue on Elm Street. Regarding Mossland Street specifically, I have concerns about the proposals. The neighborhood way, I don't think is necessarily a bad idea, but I have concerns about some of the proposed changes. And people are, I understand that there's a lot of bicyclists on this call, which is fantastic. And yes, they are at a danger because they're not in cars and we are and things like that. But living on Mossland Street, I see a lot of bicyclists blow through the light on Somerville Ave. They jump the light before it turns colors and everything else. Majority of the ones I see do not adhere to any of the, and I'm using air quotes, road rules. So I do want to point that out. Yes, something needs to change, but the cars aren't entirely at fault here either. And thank you.
Thanks, Marguerite. Next we have Jody, followed by John, and then Crystal, with about 4 folks in the queue. Jody, you should be able to unmute now.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you for putting this presentation together. This is great. So I live off of Cherry Street, right next to the corner of like Cherry and Elm, but I love the idea of possibly putting clear corners and maybe like a painting treatment, like on that corner, and actually at the corner of Summer Street and Hancock Street, which is just like a street behind me. There's some like painting treatment and like flex posts at the corner. And it seems like a similar quick build scheme, but I would say that experience of using that corner, like I feel really safe when I like walk on that street. And it seems like that's what you're trying to do on these different intersections. And I feel like if we could take what is on the corner of Summer Street and Hancock Street and possibly bring this to the corner of Cherry and Elm, that would be awesome. So it's just a comment I have. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jody. So next we have John, followed by Crystal, followed by Manraj. And that's the kind of last 3 we have in the queue. So John, you should be able to unmute now.
Yep. Hi there. I am a resident of actually Medford, but I heard this project was being done and I couldn't resist joining the meeting. I work in Davis and I go down to MIT almost every single day. So this is an intersection I go through and have to deal with. So any improvements that can be made to potentially benefit bicyclists and pedestrians I'm strongly in favor of. I mean, I know the recent improvements to Beacon Street have been fantastic. Taking that all the way down to the Kendall Square area is great. And so continuing that so that commuters and bicyclists can carry on from Beacon Street up to the community path or through Davis Square up to the Minuteman would be great. Additionally, I know there was mention around the Beach Elm Street intersection. I know it's quite wide at the moment, so I don't think it's going to be in the scope of this plan, but any future improvements that can be made there would be greatly appreciated, especially turning onto Willow Ave from Elm Street, which has that dedicated bike lane, which is a little bit easier for bicyclists than passing through Davis Square. So yeah, thank you for this fantastic presentation, and I look forward to seeing the improvements.
Thank you, John. So next we have Crystal, then Manraj, and that is all we have in the queue. Crystal, you should be able to unmute now.
Hello, this is Crystal. Thank you, everyone. I am really excited about this project. I'm really also excited that everyone has been so kind to each other in this meeting. Yeah, I'm just really pleased by that. I wrote a ton of comments in the chat. I'm really sorry. But two things that I really think are important to think about. I know that Cedar is not part of this project, but like I see the flex posts being so frequently run over, disrespected, even by the postal worker daily on Cedar, that I'm really worried about using those as a barrier here to protect people. So when designing this project, like specifically looking at the behavior that's already happening at this intersection, I just really want to highlight that that's something to think about, is how often those flex posts have to be replaced or get trashed on Cedar. I also, what's the other thing I wanted to say? Crap. I see a lot of the same cut through car behavior that people are talking about on White Street and Star Market parking lot. Also at the other end, the Elm Street where it meets with Somerville Ave, like people cut through the gas station there, people cut through the parking lot on the other side of like that little complex with the dry cleaner and such. Like that's also a frequent cut through for cars and bikes. So like the traffic flow is gonna change, but like there's a lot of non-standard traffic flow already, shall we say, if you are not often here. And yeah, I saw the diagram of the current traffic pattern at like Elm and Mossland in terms of the number of lanes that people think are there. And during rush hour in particular, there are a lot of like 2 and sometimes 3 cars trying to stick into the end of Mossland from Elm, like to be able to make that light. If there's somebody turning right onto Mossland and somebody turning left onto Mossland, and there's already a parked car there, there are a lot of cars in that entrance. And really during the light cycle at the end of Mossland, I think that only maybe 3 or 4 cars make it through before it changes. So I completely understand bicyclists going during the pedestrian right of way, because that's like feels safer, honestly. So I'm very excited for a lot of these changes, and it put me in the column of hoping that Mossland becomes some form of dead end in order to change the safety factors there, because I've seen people in the crosswalks be bumped into at very slow speeds, but bumped into on the intersection of Mossland and Elm. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Crystal. So next we have Minraj, and that's all the hands we have raised at this time. So if you want to share any spoken comment, please raise your hands now. But as we said, there's going to be multiple opportunities to connect with us, so please don't hesitate to reach out at any time. So Minraj, you should be able to unmute now.
Hi, hello. I think I have something to to just the last speaker, but I also live on some lab east side can so I've seen perhaps some commenting from things I've seen around this intersection. I think the first of those will just be about the signals themselves. A key thing seen sometimes the signals, they seem like they're very old and don't light up sufficiently. You see a lot of cars not even noticing whether they have a red or a green. This is particularly true on Somerville Ave going eastward. The next thing is, I think, related to what the previous was talking about, is this thing between Mossland and Adelaide, where you live in a few caused from how that is a disjointed intersection between two. And I don't know what exactly the best idea would be, but I think it's worth thinking about improving that somehow. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was on Somerville itself, on the north side, Somerville Ave itself, north side of it. It seems like there's many residences there, and many cars want to make stops, which end up interfering with the bike path. And again, I don't fully know what the right solution there is and whether your protected bike lane would solve that, but it seems like there's a high demand for car stops on the right side of that road, maybe to make deliveries and such. And I would encourage you to think about maybe what are best ways to accommodate that or discourage that altogether. Cool. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we do have one more additional hand raise. Next is Weston. Weston, you should be able to unmute now.
Nalia, I'm married to Weston. We're all logged in on his account, but just really appreciate this project and really excited for it and appreciate the opportunity to give a comment. I live right off of Porter where it like intersects with Elm, and so definitely want to flag that intersection as a really terrible intersection. Cars come like flying down the hill on Porter Street a lot, often kind of like run through the stop sign at the end and turn really quickly onto Elm. And so really, really unsafe for pedestrians and cyclists when you're trying to bike along Elm or like walk through that crosswalk on Elm and Porter. And same thing goes for the one that crosses Elm Street that kind of connects to that dry cleaner and like Starbucks parking lot section. It's not very visible. I think people keep moving. There used to be a sign that went in the middle that was like yield to pedestrians. People kept moving that. It kept getting hit by cars. And so I think it finally was taken out by the city. I think it would be great to have that back in. But again, I think just making that crosswalk a little bit safer. There's actually a tree that kind of blocks where the entrance to that crosswalk is. And a lot of people cross before that entrance to the crosswalk because it's just not placed in a great area. And so if that can just be more visible, and I think any sort of traffic calming measures that will prevent people from kind of turning left really quickly onto Porter and like turning left from Porter onto Elm really fast. I think Porter is a very main like thoroughfare since it's one of the only two-way streets that connects Highland to Elm. And so it just gets really, really busy and lots of cars and not a lot of space. And so a lot of cars like stop there and just really unsafe for pedestrians. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So we have no more hands in the queue or raised hands in the queue. So I think we'll begin to close out the meeting. We just want to thank you all for giving your time to participate in this project. We really, really appreciate and value your time. So thank you. As we shared, there are lots of ways to engage. We shared some of those a little bit earlier in the presentation, but you will be receiving an email in your inbox that lists out those opportunities as well as has our contact details. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, just have a wonderful evening and thank you again. Take care.